We'll start with a story. You need to take yourself back to the 17th century Japan, a battle going on at Osaka Castle. Toyotomi is trying to hold on to power inside the castle. He has 60,000 samurai there. Tokugawa and his forces, 120,000 samurai, are outside the castle. So there had this battle going on back and forth, and there seems to be stalemated. So the Toyotomi forces inside the castle have a desperate attempt to kill the Tokugawa shogun. So they send out a small detachment to penetrate through the Tokugawa forces to get at him. So when they arrive there, in the close proximity of the Tokugawa shogun, they confront a middle-aged samurai. And as they're attacking, this middle-aged samurai steps forward, and with speed and dexterity and grace, he kills 7 of the attackers. By the time the other attackers are able to come in and defeat that small detachment. And at that time, that middle-aged samurai goes back to his position to protect the Tokugawa shogun. Well, that middle-aged samurai is Yagyū Munenori. He's the sword master and instructor, the most trusted protector for the shogun. So what we want to look at here is this kind of mind that Munenori had facing this attack and being able to act decisively and calm in the middle of the stressful event. This is the kind of mind that we're looking at for if you're going to be in battle, but also for climbing and for life. If we can have a calm, decisive mind, that can be a benefit for us. It allows our attention to be used more fluidly as we blend with a constantly changing situation. So how do we remain calm and decisive in a situation that is so stressful like this? Well, that's what we're investigating with Yagyū Munenori's book, The Life-Giving Sword. Munenori lived in Japan in the late 1500s, early 1600s, 17th century basically. This is where Japan went through a transition from a long century of war toward peacetime. This is when Ieyasu Tokugawa in 1603 consolidated power and brought peace to Japan. But this peace presented a problem for Ieyasu. What do you do with samurai that have been fighting, for a century? How do you direct their efforts? Well, he had heard of a famous samurai, and that samurai was Yagyū Munenori. This was Munenori's father. And Munenori had developed the Yagyū school of swordsmanship. And they had this technique called no sword. So Ieyasu Tokugawa was curious about this no sword technique. And he invited Yagyū Munenori to the castle for a demonstration. Well, Munenori brought his son, Yagyū Munenori, along to see the demonstration. Well, what happened, Munenori was able to take Ieyasu's sword away from him. Now, Ieyasu Tokugawa was also a samurai, skilled samurai. And so he was quite impressed with Munenori's technique. And he asked him to become his teacher. Well, Munenori was an older gentleman at this time, and he declined that invitation. And what he did is he recommended his son, Munenori, to be the shogun's teacher. And this kind of set the fate for Yagyū Munenori's life. He was going to be the instructor for the shogun for his life and his successors. And he also became the leader of the Yagyū swordsmanship school. Ieyasu Tokugawa made the Yagyū school the official school in Japan. He said it was the true art of the sword that could be used during peacetime. In a previous lesson, we investigated Takuan Soho's book, The Unfeathered Mind. Takuan was Munenori's teacher and mentor and Zen master. And specifically, Takuan taught Munenori about how to apply Zen or the Zen mind to swordsmanship. So his teachings were all about creating a free mind. And this is what a lot of the content in Munenori's book addresses, like how to create this free mind in swordsmanship. And what Munenori does is he uses this training that he gets from Takwon to help him refine the Yagyū swordsmanship technique so that it could be more applicable for Japan during peacetime. Part of his method includes what he calls two swords. The death-dealing sword is one that meets an opponent head-on, in a sense, by overcoming or stifling his technique. It, in essence, kills the opponent's sword, the life-giving sword, encourages or leads the opponent to begin a technique, and thus gives life to his sword. Then, if possible, it takes that sword away or defeats the opponent in some other way. If you're going to be learning anything, swordsmanship or climbing or other activities, if you're just stifling your opponent, then it's like a end justifies the means approach. It's a focus on winning. This is an example of the death-dealing sword approach being applied. Munenori said, to think only of winning is sickness. What Munenori was interested in was the life-giving sword approach. This is where the means are important. Learning is important. Process is important. This is where you can engage with an opponent and encourage them, find where their edge is so they can stay engaged and not overwhelm them, not stifle them. You can see how this would be in climbing. If you have the death-dealing sword approach, then you're focused on fighting against gravity, fighting against the rock. You just focused on success, focused on winning, getting to the top. The life-giving sword approach, you're fighting with gravity, you're fighting with the rock so that you can learn, and then from that learning, you can achieve your goal. We'll be examining Miyamoto Musashi's Book of Five Rings in a future lesson, but I want to look at the difference between these two characters, these two samurai. Musashi was famous for extraordinary victories. He defined himself as being taught by no one. His focus was on winning. That included understanding how to perform in any way whatsoever. Musashi's motivation seemed to be the end justifies the means. The point of entering a confrontation wasn't to die honorably with your sword by your side, it was to win. In short, Musashi was a loner, he was focused on his own needs, he was focused on achievement. He was great at wielding the death-dealing sword. He was great at killing. Munenori was almost the opposite. He learned from his father and the long Yagyū tradition, then took over the responsibilities of the Yagyū school. He gave credit for all he did to the Yagyū lineage, to his ancestors. He was humble. Munenori was focused on the process. Munenori writes, there is an old saying, weapons are instruments of ill omen, despised by the way of heaven. To use them only when unavoidable is the way of heaven. It also says that to use arms when unavoidable is also the way of heaven. Although flowers blossom and greenery increases in the spring breeze, when the autumn frost comes, leaves always drop and trees wither. This is the judgment of nature. This is because there is logic in striking down something when it is completed. So he's using the example of the seasons. Death is part of this cycle. Fighting and killing are necessary sometimes. It's a natural part of life. When something matures, when something is completed, then death naturally comes. So what Munenori did is he accepted this as a natural part of the cycle, a natural part of the process. And then from that acceptance, he could only use the death-dealing sword when absolutely necessary as a last resort. Munenori writes about the fundamental key for learning swordsmanship. There may be 100 stances and sword positions, but you win with just one. The ultimate point of this is perceiving abilities and intentions. Munenori was really reflecting deeply on how to teach effectively. He wasn't just focused on the physical aspects of training, the number of stances that you can take or sword positions. He knew that perception was fundamental. And if you could discern the abilities of the opponent, then you could know better about creating an appropriate learning situation for them. If you understood their intentions, then you would understand their motivation. These are mental concepts that drive what you do in a skill that you're learning or a fight that's unfolding. And like I said earlier, the Yagyū school also had this technique called no sword. And Munenori describes it this way. The frame of mind is the fundamental meaning of no sword. The fundamental meaning is not the taking of a sword. It is the clear understanding of distance. The single stroke is not in the sword. It is in observing the indications of the intentions of your opponent. Here too you can see Munenori's focus on mindset, motivation, and intentions. Munenori was focused on the process. The means of how you did something was important. His training essentially focused on transitioning information from the mind to the body, intellectual understanding of something to an experiential, embodied understanding of it. When that transition was made complete, in other words, no more concepts in the mind, it's all been embodied, then mastery in that particular skill was achieved. Munenori writes, if you exhaustively repeat the various practices and accumulate merit in your discipline, in practice and training, the action will be in your body and limbs and not in your mind. At this point, you will not know where your mind is, and neither demons nor heresies will be able to find it. When you begin a practice, you have all kinds of concepts in your mind. You might read something in a book and think about it. You might watch a YouTube video and that gives you some ideas in your mind. You might have a coach that tells you something. Then the practice begins where you're experiencing what you intellectually know. And it takes a lot of practice to master a skill. And really it takes a lot of practice that is done in a quality manner. And you practice until there's nothing left in the mind, when it's all in the body, when it's been embodied. This is when you're creating a free mind. This is when you have created a mind that allows attention to flow as the situation is changing so that the body can do what it's been trained to do. Let's reflect back on Munenori's fight at the Battle of Osaka Castle. He's protecting the Tokugawa shogun, and he kills 7 people that are trying to kill the shogun. He stepped forward. He had calm and decisive. He had this relaxed alertness to him, to his mind. This is the kind of mind that we need if we're going to be in a fight. It's the kind of mind that can help us in climbing. It's the kind of mind that can help us in living. Munenori demonstrated that he has mastered the skill of swordsmanship. He's made that transition from the mind to the body complete. In other words, his mind is free now to allow attention to flow to the body so that the fight can be executed as needed. In peacetime, Munenori was focused on the life-giving sword aspect or approach to his teaching method. He was teaching this Zen mind. He was teaching no sword. And then through that, he was able to give life to the opponent's sword so he could create an appropriate learning situation for his students, keep them engaged so that they could learn. The goals for his training seemed to be transitioning knowledge from the mind to the body and creating a free mind. Munenori emphasized this transition of knowledge from the mind to the body. Mastery occurred when that was completed. Well, how do you make sure there's nothing left in the mind anymore? How do you know when that transition is complete? Well, you need to address presence and motivation. You take any stressful activity like falling or coaching someone that's in a stressful situation. You engage in that falling practice or you engage in that coaching with presence and motivation where you want to be in the stressful experience. Or if you're coaching, you want to coach in a way that the student wants to be in that stressful experience that you're coaching them in. Here's the drill. Falling. Presence. Focus your attention on BEB, breathing, eyes, and body. BEB focuses attention on the body and keeps you present while you fall. Motivation. Maintain learning-based motivation. Do this by taking on a small increment of stress. Begin with top rope falls. If you notice a desire to get it over with, then find a smaller increment. Coaching. Presence. Notice what BEB elements they're doing poorly. This means they've lost focus. Remind them to focus their attention on that element. Motivation. Notice how well they're processing stress. Do you see them rushing through stress or stalling out in it? If so, they've taken on too much stress. Find a smaller increment so they can process themselves through it. Engage stress with presence and learning-based motivation. If you do that, then you'll be able to transition that knowledge from the mind to the body, and you'll be able to create a free mind.